Yanis Varoufakis had a conversation about capitalism is over and social democracy is finished. I wanted to check it out. It doesn't have anything to do with Israel-Gaza. But I consider him one of the leading intellectual lights of the democratic socialist movement, a democratic socialist statesman, politician, economist. So I think we should give him a little bit of Gibberly Esquire, thank you as well, and Felonius, thank you. We should give him some room to talk. And Pecan, thank you for the 21 months.
Amazon is much worse than a monopolist. It's not just a monopolist. It's not a market. Mm-hmm. It is not a capitalist. It is like, think of it as a digital version of a fiefdom.
Yeah, sure.
In which vassal capitalists are laboring for the Lord, along with the peasants who may even love the Lord. So you mentioned before that, you know, these gadgets are all very convenient. I can't live my life without.
Techno-feudalism, What Killed Capitalism, is the new book from the bestseller Yanis Varoufakis, the hugely recognizable Greek economist who was his country's finance minister in 2015. Varoufakis thinks there is a new power reshaping the world and reshaping all of our lives. So what is techno-feudalism? Who is driving it? And is it bad for us and bad for democracy? Yanis Varoufakis, welcome to Times Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Hugo.
Great pleasure to have you here. Look, this idea, the idea of techno-feudalism, the idea that we've sort of reverted to a feudal situation but with tech bosses as the new overlords, it's a fascinating idea. Tell us about it.
It's based on this hunch that I developed some years ago that, you know, I come from the left. We are the losers of history. We're leftists, as you very well know. We used to believe that organized labor would overthrow capitalism, or take over capital. It never happened. But what has happened instead is a delicious irony.
I would say one thing. Chat. Don't give up. Don't give up. I think this is something that leftists occasionally do, where they're materialists, but almost kind of, I would call hard materialist, in that when they lose, they're like, nothing else could have happened but with us losing. Therefore, we made no mistakes. Or if any mistakes we made, we had to make, kind of thing. And I don't think that's true. I think if certain random events had happened slightly differently, outcomes could have been changed. Imagine if FDR doesn't have his brain explode because he has 500 BP blood pressure. You know, who knows how things could have gone differently. So the one thing that happens with some leftists is, like, when Bernie Sanders lost, some people say, oh, it was overdetermined. He was always going to lose. And I think that is actually a bad way of looking at things. Because oftentimes in history, movements lose a lot before they win.
The capital became so triumphant that it mutated like a stupid virus that creates a variant that kills its host. Mm-hmm. So this is my hypothesis, that capital has become so successful and so powerful and so toxic that it has killed capitalism. Now, in practice, what does this mean and why should people care? It means that whereas profit was the fuel and the lubricant of the socioeconomic system known as capitalism, and markets were the mechanism that synthesized all our efforts, brought together producers, consumers, organized economic activity, infected our culture, the whole thing. Now we are moving away from profit back to rent. Mm-hmm. Which is the feudal form of wealth accumulation.
To give people a sort of very concrete idea of what you're talking about, you're talking about, for example, the way I don't know, on a really basic level, the way we would have a Netflix subscription rather than buy DVDs, the way we rent our music, the way we're less likely to own our homes. I mean, at what level do we do all this?
Actually, allow me to put it slightly differently.
Sure.
Right. Once upon a time, Saatchi and Saatchi, the great advertisers, would create a poster or a TV ad. They would put the idea in your head that you wanted to buy something. Then you went out to a shop and you bought it from the actual shop that gets it from the producer directly. And the producer, the capitalist, would make a profit out of it. And profit would run the system. Today, Alexa is sitting on your desk, or Siri, or whatever, some interface with the net. You are training it to train you, to train it, to impress upon you how good it is at giving you advice on what to buy. I don't know about you, but Spotify really is spot on regarding what I actually like.
Yeah.
And once it gets this power over you, on the basis that it serves you, and it gives you good advice, then it can recommend things for you to buy. And not only that, but this is the astonishing thing, you don't need to go to the shop to buy it. The same piece of what I call cloud capital, that capital that lives on the cloud, sells you the stuff directly through Amazon.com, which is the same agglomeration of capital, cloud capital, as the Alexa that talks to you and interacts with you. That's not.
One thing that I would say, just to modify this critique and kind of expound on it more, I would actually say it was Walmart that started this, which is basically you have a capitalist who's so hyper dominant in the retail sphere that they have such a high percentage of total commerce happening in retail. You could even say Sears, and what made Walmart really unique is they would go to the producers and they would use monopolistic power. What does that mean? Monopsony means one buyer. Monopoly is one seller. Monopsony is one buyer. And Walmart would be like, oh, you want to sell your pill organizer? Well, you have to give us monopsonistic pricing. You have to charge us way less than you would sell it to another retailer because we're going to buy 1 million units. So you want to sell 1 million units, you got to sell it to us at that monopsonistic price. And that is what has happened. And so basically, that created a situation where that monopsonistic price from Walmart was basically the same, that loss, like the actual market clearing price of the pill organizer versus what, Walmart was able to get. That's basically rent. That's basically rent. And the reason why Walmart was able to do that is because they had such a large share of the total retail market. They could use that market position to increase their bargaining power and force down the price and lower the profitability of the producers. So instead of having, multiple different retailers competing with the pill organizer producer to get to a fair wholesale price that would give that guy a good profit while also providing the retailer with margin for profit, now almost all the producer profit is actually captured by Walmart. And Walmart, because of that monopolistic power to get it at a lower wholesale price, defeats other retailers, thereby raising their market share again. And that's basically what we're seeing with Amazon. And Amazon is doing it to the next level, which is Amazon doesn't even buy the shit anymore. They own a marketplace that you go to and you search pill organizer on Amazon and pill organizers pop up. And now Amazon just takes a chunk of whatever the retail price is. They're literally a lord. They're literally the capitalist fiefdom because they're no longer taking any risk. They just charge because they control the platform. So you could see how capitalism has evolved to the point where now, if you're an Amazon shareholder, you're basically like the equivalent of the Lord Mayor. You just take a percentage of all commerce as a tax. You didn't even do anything. And that is where we're going in the future, where there are people that are designated to just take money because they were designated to take money. You see the same thing in life insurance, or excuse me, health insurance. We just have these private health insurance conglomerates. Why? Their profits are guaranteed by the government. Why do we need them to have profit? Why doesn't the government just do it itself? It would be more efficient. It would be cheaper. But no, there are feudal lords, you see. They have political power. So they get to take a share of the money that goes into the healthcare industry. They just get to take a portion of it as guaranteed profit. Another word to say, they are the lords of healthcare. They get a share of the healthcare area. They get a fief.
The market anymore. It's not capitalism. What happens is Amazon charges 40% to the capitalist who produces.
Oh, now he's going to explain everything I just said.
Stuff that you buy. Amazon doesn't produce anything. So it's not just that you do not own stuff and you rent it. It is that you have the complete bypassing of markets and the replacement of profit with a new form of cloud rent, or rent, which I call cloud rent. And why does this matter? It matters because our society becomes increasingly unstable as a result.
Why does it become unstable? Because I mean, some people would say this is great. I get what I want. I don't need to do so much work about it. I don't care whether my money's going to one company I don't know or another company I don't know. So it goes to Amazon. How's that my problem?
Because rent is waste.
Right.
Unlike profit, when a producer of bicycles, of binoculars, of cars, whatever, gets a profit, they have to invest a large part of it in order to maintain competitiveness. So this goes back into the economy. If you are a rentier, you collect rent in your sleep. Jeff Bezos doesn't need to do anything. Capitalists work.
You know who did this in video games? Valve. It's funny that he says this because didn't Varoufakis work for Valve? Didn't Varoufakis help set up Steam? He helped create what he's talking about. He literally has created what he is saying is terrible. I don't think he realized what he was. This is like Frankenstein. Although the moral of the story of Frankenstein is actually the monster wasn't the monster, we are, but you get my point. The vulgar understanding of Frankenstein. He doesn't know what he's creating. I hate when people do what I just did, but fuck you. I'm trying to communicate an idea.
For him, and when he gets this 40%, he just puts it away. He uses it to speculate in financial markets. Doesn't go back into investment into anything.
But I mean, for the consumer, this sort of thing feels like it has made life easier, right? It's made life cheaper, but it's made life cheaper.
Why don't we just nationalize Amazon? Why does Amazon need to be a private entity? Why doesn't the government own the cloud? Why doesn't the government collect the tax so that we could administer society and provide resources? Why do we need Amazon to be the ones who capture all this as private profit? The idea of this market has been invented, but now it's being leveraged in such a way as to destroy the world. We should take it back. We don't have the laws to do so, Mike. We do have the laws to do so. We just refuse to use them. Real David E. Beats, thank you for the 13 months.
I can't live without.
But it's made life cheaper as well.
Of course.
And so the waste is...
But it's made life cheaper, but actually has it? Is it more and more wealth going to the top? Isn't income inequality exploding?
Waste feels intangible.
It feels intangible, but it really does poison our lives because...
Wait, what the fuck are you... This guy doesn't know basic economics, which is very frustrating. When Amazon takes 40% of every transaction, that means there's 40% less money available to invest in increasing productivity or compensating labor. That is 40% going to the top 0.0001%. That is a acceleration of power, of economic power, because money equals economic resources, equals control over the distribution of wealth, the control over production. Do you understand that? Money isn't just fucking floating orbs of light. It represents power. Jesus Christ. I think the worst part of talking about politics with people is they have so little understanding of basics, like foundational basics. You're not taught to think about that kind of stuff. Because if you're thinking about that kind of stuff, you might challenge what the status quo is. You might go, huh?
Hugo, if you think about it, when, let's say, a large chunk of national income is withdrawn from the circular flow of income and is stashed away in some financial circuit and simply feeds this financial game and comes out of people's wages. Let me give you a very striking example. General Motors, Ford Motor Company, Siemens, Volkswagen, they pay all those corporations, old-style capitalist corporations, pay 85% of their revenues as wages, salaries, and so on. Facebook, 1%.
Yeah.
Amazon, 1.5%. What happens to the rest is withdrawn. The result is that the people out there suffer permanent austerity, not necessarily, George Osborne's austerity, but austerity in the sense that there isn't enough money going around. That's why we have what David Graeber so scientifically described as bullshit jobs, because there's no good investment in jobs. This is why central banks, like the Bank of England, cannot stop printing money, even when they're trying to quantitatively tighten, because there is not enough money going around. So the state has to keep producing money, feeding even inflation. So if we feel today that there's a polycrisis, as Adam Tooze has described it, that we have multiple crises, including the climate crisis, that, in my estimation, has to do with the fact that after 2008, governments tried to save the banks, and by printing something like $30 to $35 trillion, right? Remember Gordon Brown, April 2009, bringing together the G7 central banks. They started the printing presses. Now, that money was never invested in anything except cloud capital by the Bezoses and big tech. And the other big tech conglomerate revolution, of course, took place in China.
Yeah.
In my book, I try to explain the new Cold War between the US and China. I ignore issues of Taiwan and so on. I think this is absolutely irrelevant. Just a red herring. It's the clash of the two...
Absolutely irrelevant.
...forms of cloud capital that are taking over the world, the American and the Chinese. And we, here in Europe and in Britain, are becoming increasingly sad, irrelevant entities.
Well, that's another cheery point that we'll come on to in just a moment. But as a figure of the left,
and by the way, the difference between let's get down to brass tacks here for a second. The difference between American capital and Chinese capital is Chinese capital is state-controlled and state-owned under a disciplined, ideological communist party. That's Chinese capital. American capital is oligarchic, fascistic capital under unfettered neoliberalism. Capital with no counterbalance. So you have Chinese form of this capital, which is under a disciplined, ideological, state-owned communist party, versus which way? Which way? Think about it. I wish there was a third choice, if I'm being honest with you.
Does this make you want capitalism back? I mean, does this make you nostalgic for capitalism? Does this make you think we need to rescue capitalism? Because that's a very counterintuitive position for you to find yourself in.
I'm nostalgic about poetry, about drama, about art. I'm never nostalgic about a dead socioeconomic system. So if this was the 1770s, 1800s, would we be nostalgic of feudalism, which was dying? No. Let's move on. I'm just nostalgic of the idea of the liberal individual, and that I'm saying as a leftist.
Yeah.
Because the idea of, a nice ring fencing between your work life and your leisure, that's all gone now.
But so does this make...
True.
What you're talking about, this techno-feudalism, this move from capitalism towards the situation that you've very eloquently described, does that make it harder? Does that... You're basically saying that makes it much harder, if not impossible, to then move towards socialism, social democracy in the manner that you would have always wanted to do. That's become a harder task now.
You are right in an important sense. Social democracy is bank. It's finished.
Right.
I say this without any glee. I'm not a social democrat, but I do believe that social democracy played a very important civilizing role in the 1960s and 70s. So, Harold Wilson in this country, Willy Brandt in Germany, Bruno Kreisky in Austria. What they did was they played the role of referee. They brought into one large room the captains of industry, leaders of the auto industry, of steel making and so on one side, and the TUC, the organized labor, on the other, and they cut a deal between them whereby a chunk of the surpluses of the capitalists would fund the state, NHS and so on, and wages. That cannot happen now.
But you'd think that would be easier to do now, because
now it is absolutely, utterly impossible.
But you'd think, like it's for relatively small countries in Europe, it's hard. And
okay. So what Yanis is basically talking about is, what did social democracies do in reality to create? What did Norway do to create Norway? Basically, organized labor was powerful enough that it built this social democratic power that used the state that was under the control of organized labor to go to the capitalists and say, listen, we're not going to kill you all. You can stay here, you can stay rich, you can stay in the corner office, but we don't want any hungry children. We think childcare should be free. We want to have public transit. We want to have public housing. We're going to have public health care. We're going to have free college, and you're going to pay for it all. And if you don't, we're going to shut it all down. And they agreed to that deal. Capitalists got to continue being capitalists. Capitalists still got to be rich. They still got to be powerful. But they had to pay a big, heavy tax. That arrangement, in Yanis' opinion, is no longer plausible. And let's hear why he thinks that.
United States, you'd think they could more easily cut a deal. The government could cut a deal with Amazon to reincorporate some of the money. No, is that not?
Well, look at what's happening in the United States today. Lima Khan, who is the chair of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is starting. I think she's very well-meaning and she's a very smart woman, and I wish her very well. She's starting a law. A legal battle against Amazon.
Yeah.
But I think she's doing it the wrong way.
Right.
Because she's treating Amazon in the way that Teddy Roosevelt treated Standard Oil and Rockefeller back in the 1920s.
Absolutely.
As a monopolist that needs to be broken up. Amazon is much worse than a monopolist. It's not just a monopolist. It's not a market. It is not a capitalist. It is like, think of it as a digital version of a fiefdom.
Yeah, sure.
In which vassal capitalists are laboring for the Lord, along with the peasants who may even love the Lord. So you mentioned before that, these gadgets are all very convenient. I can't live my life without them.
Yeah, sure.
So we are voluntary servants, voluntary cloud serfs to these people. So, Lima Khan has her work cut out for her.
So it makes sense. Sound huge. Look, for a quick recap, you were the Greek finance minister for 8 months in 2000.
No, 5.5.
Forgive me, 5.5. Terrible exaggeration. Just felt like longer. In 2015, having just been elected to Parliament with your country in deep recession, and your party was promising to renegotiate Greece's debt and curtail its austerity measures, and ultimately you resigned from your position and then from Parliament, having not been able to achieve what you'd set out to do. Hopefully that's a very quick summary of a big time, and hopefully it's reasonable.
It's perfectly reasonable.
Do the kind of developments you're talking about in this book make you think differently about that time?
No, not at all, because that was a very brutish and antiquated kind of clash.
Right.
Greece for 20 years after we joined, or we started the process of joining the Eurozone, we became the archetypal case of vendor financing. So, to put it in crude but not misleading terms, Mercedes-Benz or Volkswagen were giving us the money to buy their cars. That's vendor financing. Yeah. It was their way of getting rid of surplus products and surplus money, and it was the way of the Greek bourgeoisie, ruling class state, to pretend that we were growing. And of course, this was never going to end well. The moment Lehman Brothers went under, Deutsche Bank went under, the financing stopped, and the bubble burst, and then we were bankrupt. And then the European Union, in its infinite wisdom, and our ruling class in its cruelty, decided to cover up the bankruptcy by taking on more loans to pretend that we could repay our previous loans, which we couldn't, on conditions of austerity, of harsh austerity, unbelievable austerity, which was depleting the little incomes that couldn't repay the previous loans. And I stepped in there for one purpose: to cut this process dead, to stop this, to say we need to embrace our bankruptcy, we need to suffer the consequences of our bankruptcy, but no more loans, no more credit cards, pretending we are repaying the previous credit cards. And that is the only way of rebooting and restarting. And you don't need to be a left-winger to believe that. That's why I had a lot of support amongst the Tories in this country.
Quite, yeah. How do you look back on that period? Do you look back on that period as you did the best you could do? Do you look back that you succeeded in some way, or that you entirely failed?
Entirely failed.
Entirely failed, yeah.
But I don't regret it for a moment. I have to say that I have a certain amount of pride in the sense that I went in there to do the right thing. I was prevented from doing the right thing by my own prime minister, especially on the night of the 5th of July 2015, when the Greek people very heroically gave us a 62% referendum mandate to do the right thing. The prime minister succumbed, surrendered, and I resigned. And I think that there's something to be said about politicians who resign when they realize that they cannot do what they promised their electorate they should do.
Well, generally they'd have to resign an awful lot if that was the norm, wouldn't it?
I agree.
Your old party, Syriza, has just elected as leader Stefanos Kasselakis, who has no sort of real political career to date at all, and no parliamentary seat, and lived in Miami until earlier this year, and he's now the leader of the Greek opposition. Where does this leave sort of the left in Greece when you need a figure like?
Wow, I mean, honestly, we're talking about some real shit here. And, my personal opinion is never resign, be insubordinate. Never resign, be insubordinate. Be a revolutionary. That's my personal opinion. Mango TCG, thank you for the tier 3, buddy.
Like this to come in and lead.
In desperation.
Right.
There's no left.
There's no left, really.
I mean, I've started the party some time ago. We managed to get elected to parliament. We got 9 seats in 2019. We lost our seats last June, and instead there are 3 fascist parties sitting where we used to sit. The gentleman that you mentioned, I'm sure he's a very, very nice person, and I don't mind the fact that he lived in Miami. I used to live in Texas. Who am I to judge him on that? But I don't know him. Nobody had heard of him until this was the nearest you can get to a hostile takeover of a political party within 3 weeks by an unknown suitor.
Yeah.
But look, the night of that referendum that I mentioned before, when my colleague and prime minister effectively betrayed the mandate of the people, was the end of that party. And of the left of that party had managed to encourage, to reinforce, and so on. Now what we have is a logical conclusion of that depoliticization of the left.
Right, understood. Look, Yanis Varoufakis, I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. But thanks very much. A great pleasure to speak to you. Techno-feudalism, Who Killed Capitalism, is, I believe, it's out now? It's out already?
Yes, it was out 2 days ago.
Out 2 days ago. Wonderful. Yanis Varoufakis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Honestly, I should ask Yanis to come on. I should ask him to come on the stream.